President Trump delivered his State of the Union address last night to a joint session of Congress, though dozens of Democratic lawmakers chose not to attend, including some from right here in Houston, while another of their area colleagues who did attend was ejected from the room for a second straight year. Let's talk about it with Party Politics co-host Brandon Rottinghouse and Baker Institute political science fellow Mark Jones. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good morning, Craig.
Morning, Craig.
First, as we discuss the speech itself, I'll note that you can find detailed fact-checking and analysis right now at npr.org. What were your general takeaways from last night's speech, Mark?
When it was long, but that was to be expected.
Yeah, his longest ever, right?
I think it'd be approaching 2 hours almost. It was one where clearly he was effectively trying to bait Democrats. Sometimes they fell for it. Not too much focus on Iran, but clearly I think framing the focus on the economy, realizing that he's in trouble as we approach November of 2026 in the midterms, and that he's going to need to steer public opinion and get more Americans on his side and have a positive opinion of his management of the economy, which right now he's underwater with most Americans. He's even slightly underwater here in Texas, which isn't a good thing for a Republican president.
Brandon?
Yeah, the stakes were extremely high for the president. We're in an election year. As polling, as Mark said, is underwater on a lot of issues. He's losing ground on things that he ran on that he should be polling well on, like the economy and immigration. The Supreme Court is dropping his signature policy issues, and you've got the fight over tariffs. DHS is shut down. So there were a lot of things on the agenda. I think he accomplished a handful of things. He definitely rerouted some of the attention to the economy. He needed to give the Republicans some cover. He didn't exactly do that, but he did give them some talking points. And the fact that he's coming here to Texas this week, I think kind of reinforces some of that. Definitely a moment for Trump to try to reclaim the stage. They've been on defense the last couple months where they had been on offense for most of his first term. So it was a moment for him to try to reclaim it. He did to some degree. We'll see how it plays out, because that's frankly how most people see the State of the Union. No one is staying up like Mark and I to watch this for 2 hours, but people are watching snippets of it, and he gave enough sound bites that I think he'll win the day.
NPR senior political editor Domenico Martinaro noted 5 major takeaways. One of them, you just mentioned, the economy. Martinaro noted that while the president offered a sunny view of the economy, he did not mention any economic challenges that Americans are facing. Not that we would necessarily expect that. Among the other takeaways, he says his message heading into the midterm elections is not new, that he focused on immigration, crime, and culture wars, that he did not share a clear-cut legislative agenda, that Democrats responded to the speech in lots of wide-ranging ways, and we'll get into all of that, and that none of it changed anybody's mind about anything. So before we dive into the specifics on each of those, would you generally agree with that analysis that those were the main takeaways?
Well, certainly we're in a polarized world where everybody's looking through a different lens, and Democrats are going to see failure and they aren't going to be convinced by anything the president said, and Republicans are going to look at it from a much rosier perspective. So I think that's correct, that we are definitely in a situation where this probably did not change the minds of many people whatsoever.
To quote the American president, Aaron Sorkin's great movie, this is a moment that the president needed to rise to. And the problem isn't that the president can't sell it. The problem is that the American people aren't buying it. He talked about how the economy was doing well. He pointed to a handful of things that objectively, some of which are true, but I don't think people feel it. And the kind of refrain about winning did, I think, land really flat with a lot of people who are suffering. So it wasn't a very realistic State of the Union in the sense that he's not portraying this as something that is real for people. It was a little bit kind of pie in the sky, maybe kind of wishful thinking a little bit.
Is it wishful thinking or just political calculation that the GOP are better off just claiming economic success regardless of whether that's true?
Well, yeah, I think you're seeing in cherry picking, looking at the stock market and looking at indicators that are favorable and not at sort of affordability issues, which tend to be unfavorable. And I think we saw some pivoting that the immigration is going to continue to be an issue as we approach the midterm, and transgender issues, which Republicans realize is a winning issue for them and that it mobilizes the base. And it also is an issue that appeals to a majority of November voters. Even we saw this week, Governor Gavin Newsom from California was trying to make the point that his Democratic colleagues need to stop talking so much about transgender issues and focus on more issues of bread and butter concern to average voters, not things that only appeal to a small segment of the electorate.
immigration had been a beneficial issue for Republicans after what went down in Minneapolis and the behavior of ICE in a number of U.S. cities, Houston included. Is it still a winning issue for Republicans, potentially?
I think that he's trying to claw the Republicans back into the world where that's true. I think that the most sellable component of this is that you can personalize this issue, and he did that. He brought in people who've been affected by immigration, and some of the people who were here were undocumented and committed crimes. Definitely resonated with people. Those are the moments that are very shareable, and I think generally that's what presidents are looking for from these. The challenge, though, was, of course, getting, frankly, funding back for DHS, which at this point still isn't. And he's going to have to really convince Republicans and Democrats that this is the way forward. And that's going to require him to be flexible. And that's not the Trump we know. And I don't think we saw that last night.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Mark.
And one thing, I think on immigration, it's still a winning issue for Republicans, but they have to sort of dial it back in terms of ICE. Democrats, though, run the risk with their abolish ICE. I was watching some interviews with Kendall Scudder, the Texas Democratic Party chair, where he's literally wearing a hat that says abolish ICE. When Democrats pull things that far to the left, that's not where a majority of Americans are, nor a majority of Texans. They aren't in favor of the ICE raids and the masked ICE agents, but they do want high levels of border security and stronger enforcement of immigration laws. So Democrats run the risk that while Trump and his administration have gone too far to the right, they may present an image where they want to pull too far to the left and lose the advantage that they could potentially get with voters on the issue.
While the president may not have offered an overarching legislative agenda, as you pointed out, Brandon, among the things that he called for was for Congress to fund the Department of Homeland Security, of course, also to address drug prices, to ban congressional insider trading, see how that goes, to ban commercial licenses for anyone in the country illegally, and to pass a bill requiring proof of citizenship to vote. Of course, non-citizens aren't eligible to vote in federal or state elections. What do you make of those requests from the president?
He presented it as sort of a buffet instead of a fixed menu of items. If he had said these are the things you have to pass and press Congress to do it, then I think he could get a lot of them passed. He's got party unity. He's got the numbers, at least most of the time, most days. So there are opportunities for him to be successful legislatively. But he kind of presented a bunch of things that Congress is sort of split on, right? You mentioned the insider trading issue. That's something that the Republicans have not been on board with.
And
that's
something that really, that is so inside baseball. I think
Yes.
most people do not care.
I think that's
much
totally
about
right. Yeah, it's a very niche thing. And, Republicans like to talk about Nancy Pelosi getting rich in office, but a lot of people have. And there's a lot of scholarship on this that says that it probably should be banned. But that's not the only thing. There are other things he talked about that are just non-starters, like having this retirement account for people who are in industries that aren't federal industries or aren't federal government jobs, but that are like that in terms of savings accounts. And those are things that are just hard to pull off. When asked what he would do to make this happen, the Treasury Secretary said they'd use reconciliation, which, speaking of inside baseball, is just a really complicated and difficult way to get things passed. So a lot of these things are just kind of items that you could walk past on a buffet and take, but he's not making them do it. I think he did it in part because he wants to make a case that this is what presidents should do. And generally, State of the Unions are about agenda setting for presidents, but it's not always a guarantee it's going to happen.
Democrats did respond in a variety of ways. As I said, dozens chose not to attend the speech at all. Among them, Houston area Representatives Lizzie Fletcher, Sylvia Garcia, and Christian Menefee. Congressman Al Green, however, did attend and was kicked out again after displaying a sign that read, "Black people aren't apes." This was in reference to a meme President Trump shared on social media depicting former President and Mrs. Obama as apes. That post was later removed amid backlash. What did you make of the ways Houston area Democrats chose to handle this year's address?
Well, I think both Christian Menefee and Sylvia Garcia stayed back in Houston campaigning in the final days of the primary. Al Green, I think in a very staged manner. I think last year it was more organic. This year it seems staged, and he was simply doing it so that he could get on TV, get news coverage of him as his campaign faces some serious challenges against Menefee, and then get ejected. In doing so, he, as well as several of his Democratic colleagues, broke with what Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic minority leader, had suggested, is that they all remain silent and they don't get baited in by things that Trump said or essentially tried to bait them or get them to react to. I think for Green, it seemed pretty staged to me that it was done primarily as a campaign gimmick to try to help his flagging campaign against Christian Menefee. And then in terms of not attending, I think for Menefee and Garcia, I think they felt that their time was better spent here than there.
I think that makes sense. The kind of crux of Al Green's campaign has been this kind of protest to politics kind of approach. The billboard right out on 45 here has him shaking his cane saying, Al Green will fight for you. So there's definitely an element there that he wants to put up a fight. And Democrats, I think, generally looking for ways to try to make themselves relevant in this moment where Trump holds a 2-hour pep rally. It might be time for us to think about an alternative to the State of the Union. You had a lot of Democrats who didn't show up. You have a 2-hour speech in a moment where you've got a reduced attention span all around. It was basically a partisan theater enterprise for the 2 hours. And so there is, I think, a lot of people who are looking at this and saying we should probably think about whether to redo or to have State of the Unions in the same format.
Yeah. To be fair, it's been partisan theater for a long, long time.
Right. Yeah, but especially with this president, we have a situation where when he wants to say something, he says it on the daily basis. So, say going back to the 80s or the 70s, the State of the Union was the time when you actually could hear what the president wanted to say, what they wanted to propose as their agenda. It was one time for them to actually reach out to the American public unfiltered. Today, we have a president who reaches out to the American public on a daily basis, unfiltered via the social media. So in that type of climate, it doesn't have the same sort of gravitas that it once did.
Yeah, the 5 takeaways you mentioned, one of them was that we've sort of seen this before. I think that's very true. This was a speech that very similar to the kind of State of the Union he's given before and very similar to the some speech he gives pretty much on a weekly basis. So in a way, we're seeing a lot of the same greatest hits, which for presidents is good. The kind of key for presidents is to have that repetition. And for State of the Unions, we know that the president, when they take it on the road after the State of the Union, there can be success in sort of moving the needle. So they need that because he's underwater on a lot of these issues where he's going to have to really play some catch up. The fact that he's coming to Texas to talk about the politics of the State of the Union and to talk about some of the key issues is, I think, an indication that they're a bit worried about where things are.
Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger gave the formal Democratic response. What, if anything, should we know about what she had to say?
I think it just highlights Democrats are going to be focusing on the economy and affordability and how it's been increasingly difficult for Americans to make ends meet during the Trump administration. So I think she very much clearly signaled that's going to be a top priority for Democrats as they campaign in the midterms and are on track to what I think would appear to be capturing a majority in the U.S. House and threatening the Republican majority in the U.S. Senate, where Texas, of course, then comes into play in November of 2026 as one of the key states that Republicans have to hold if they're going to retain their Senate majority.
Yeah, to piggyback on the question about the Latino vote, it is the biggest swing vote, and as a percentage of the electorate, especially for Democrats to try to take Texas, they're going to have those numbers really pop. And this is an opportunity for them to do that. Trump won in big ways in 2024 and was able to increase that percentage of the vote, but it's slipping. And so they've got to really talk about those issues. And if you look at the polling, affordability is the key issue for a lot of Latino voters. So that's the key to winning Texas. That's the key to winning the Latino vote. And I think that certainly Trump knows that.
This next question has to go to my fellow hockey fan across the table here. Yeah. Among the very few bipartisan moments at last night's address was an acknowledgement of the gold medal winning U.S. Olympic men's hockey team, most of whom were in attendance for the speech. Their victory was momentarily a unifying experience, but even it has been politicized. Why?
Well, there are a couple reasons. One, President Trump, when he called the U.S. men's team to congratulate them on his victory, made a joke about having to invite the women's team or otherwise he'd be impeached, which is causing great uproar on the left. And I think it just highlights how we're in an era now where everything gets politicized, regardless of how non-political it is. The left is upset that the hockey players in the moment didn't express outrage in the midst of their celebration and chastise President Trump. And at the end of the day, it's one of the few things that we have to still unify the country, Olympic gold medal. So it'd be nice if we could have one issue where we could just say they won the gold medal. Let's congratulate them. It's a great victory. And of course, noting that there are 3 St. Louis natives on the men's Olympic hockey team, a record for any city in the entire country.
Okay. That's a little off topic, but fair enough. There was another piece in all of this, which is who else was in the locker room with them? when they were celebrating.
Akash Patel, who's a hockey fan, but
This is the FBI director.
who seemed to be enjoying the celebration quite a bit. So I guess you could look at it on one hand, okay, it's probably not from a protocol perspective the best look. On the other hand, he was an American celebrating with his team in that moment. He's a hockey fan. Once again, I think the criticism of Director Patel is probably a little overstated. I mean, we can at least have a few moments that are just non-political.
Bottom line, Brandon, did anything about the State of the Union change anyone's mind about anything?
Probably not. Most State of the Unions don't exactly connect to American people. Like, you don't see it using kind of as a tool for people to really understand the political world. It tends to be kind of indexed into the general political fray. His State of the Unions do have the tendency to set the agenda for the president, and they can use that effectively. I don't think that happened because really this is an agenda we already knew generally, and there are some things that he tried to press Republicans on that he's going to have to I think vociferously fight on. It's not obvious that that's going to work either. So the tangible outcomes of the State of the Union are pretty modest. I do think it was a moment, like you all were talking about, to build that unity. And he did give a couple of Congressional Medals of Honor, and the stories are really impactful. I think those are moments that can bring people together, but they're few and far between. And the problem for the State of the Union is just that they're not able to really find that unity and to have that really press America forward. It feels very partisan, and it feels like it's pressing just the bases agenda forward.
Brandon, early voting continues ahead of next Tuesday's primary election day. What most intrigues you about how campaigns are handling these final days?
It's all about turnout, and turnout's up. I think this is good for both parties and generally for Texas, who tends to be on the bottom of the list when it comes to turnout. The excitement about these races definitely has matriculated down to people, and so we're seeing a lot more action there. Democrats are bragging about having people run in all the offices up and down the ballot. That, too, is spurring turnout. I think the wake-up call for Democrats from 2024 has finally landed. They know they've got to get the voters out, and especially the key kind of coalition partners that they need to be able to be competitive in Texas. So that, to me, is the most interesting kind of moment so far.
Mark, any specific races that you're following in terms of how they're handling these final days?
Well, I think the marquee race here on the Democratic side is Crockett-Tallarico. That's what's driving all of this increased voter turnout.
This is the U.S. Senate race.
Yeah, for the U.S. Senate race. We're looking at turnout now where Democrats are probably going to cross the 1 million mark for early vote today. In most primaries, 2024 and 2022, Democratic turnout was either a little above or a little below 1 million. And we're going to be through that with still 2 days remaining of early voting and Election Day. Republican side, it's more business as usual. It's going to be up a little bit, but nothing dramatic. I think one of the difficulties that a lot of campaigns that are not the U.S. Senate race are facing is you have lots of voters going to vote in that U.S. Senate race, but they don't really know what's going on down ballot below the Senate race. And so campaigns are scrambling, whether it's congressional campaigns, county level campaigns, state legislative campaigns. They're trying to get their name out there as quickly as possible because they want voters to, once they vote for Crockett or Tallarico, to also vote for them. But I think we're having a lot of voters as they go down the ballot, kind of picking and choosing almost at random.
Again, on the Republican side, Brandon, is this why President Trump's headed to Texas?
I think so. They know they have to hold Texas. It's the biggest red jewel in their crown, and they can't afford to let it fall. I think, too, that there's worry that the president is slipping on some of these issues, like I mentioned earlier, and they've got to hold that line. That's why there's so much interest in Texas. I mean, it's potentially in play. There's definitely going to be competition and a lot of money. It may end up being the most expensive Senate race in history, and so we're seeing attention for that very reason. I also think, like Mark said, that the candidates kind of down ballot are looking for opportunities to try to make a kind of move, and Trump wants to make sure his elected or his selected individuals end up winning. One interesting element is that Senator Cruz this week endorsed Steve Toth in one of the local congressional races here against Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw also didn't get, as an incumbent, Donald Trump's endorsement. So it has a little bit of political intrigue, and you've got some crossed wires there where Greg Abbott is in some cases endorsing people that Donald Trump is not. So some of those divides, I think, are being kind of magnified because you've got this internal fight within the Republican Party, not just about personality all the time, but sometimes about the politics of it.
Mark, Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzales is rejecting calls for his resignation over a scandal involving an alleged affair he had with a staffer who later died by suicide. Setting aside for a moment the tragic elements of the story, politically speaking, why would it be significant if Gonzales did ultimately resign?
Well, we have a narrow Republican majority in the U.S. House where every vote counts. If Gonzales were to say resign today or tomorrow, the earliest that Governor Abbott could probably schedule that election, he'd have to schedule a special one, which he, I guess, would do in that case, which he didn't do in Congressional District 18. But it would be for May. And so you would once again have a few months where the Republicans in the U.S. House were at a disadvantage. On the other hand, I think Gonzales, has been facing an increasingly difficult primary against Brandon Herrera on March 3rd, which he is now more likely to lose than win, although that could go to a runoff. And the pressure is only going to mount on him. I think the only reason you're not seeing more pressure is that congressional Republicans are thinking about, well, what happens if we don't have that vote for 3 months? That's going to make things really difficult for us.
Yeah, the incumbent has not lost in a Republican primary since 2014, Ralph Hall up in North Texas, and he was a former Democrat. So we could see two potentially lose. We could see Crenshaw lose, and you could see, in this case, Tony Gonzales lose, maybe John Cornyn too. So it would be kind of a big moment for Republican insurgents who are looking to knock off incumbents.
Back on Friday, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, struck down President Trump's authority to raise tariffs through the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. He responded by raising tariffs across the board, citing other authority, at least temporarily. Should we anticipate more judicial whack-a-mole over his tariff policies?
Oh, without question. Since the president is looking for other ways to effectively engage in the same policymaking, you're going to see opposition to that, and once again, a long slog through the courts challenging some of those tariffs. What was interesting last night in the State of the Union address was actually, while he criticized the Supreme Court, he didn't do it at the level that one might have thought he would have done it, particularly in terms of how he feels betrayed by two of his nominees.
Well, he did that on Friday, so right, maybe he doesn't need to do it again.
Yeah, but he still did not mention. I mean, they were, it was something where that was actually when I was thinking about last night. One of the things that he could have done one of the things that I was surprised that he didn't do a little sharper was essentially attack the Supreme Court a little more. This is something where I think it throws a real monkey wrench into a lot of the negotiations that the president carried out with other countries that were based on him having this authority, which now he doesn't seem to have. So overall, it's a situation where it adds more uncertainty to the markets and more uncertainty for investors, which isn't a good thing.
And let's talk refunds. The Democrats are saying they'd love to have some of that money back. J.D. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, has said that the president basically owes every Illinoisan $1,700. FedEx is suing to try to get some of that money back. This is going to take years too, I think, along with the court battles that might come. But one thing the president didn't do, I think, effectively is make a good case for tariffs. He really never has. He's used this as a kind of catch-all to make the nation's economic ills go away. But now he has to convince Congress that that's the case. And his own party is split on this. Democrats are a flat no. So the challenge for him is going to be to say, like, if we use this mechanism to get the kind of ball rolling on tariffs, then he's going to have to really sell it. And that he hasn't done.
Mark, what else are you keeping tabs on in politics this week?
Well, I think the Republican U.S. Senate race is increasingly interesting because we're looking at a runoff. That is, it's going to go to a May 26th runoff, and that runoff increasingly looks like it's going to be between John Cornyn and Ken Paxton. But I think there's going to be a real battle between now and March 3rd by the Cornyn camp to get as close to Paxton as possible, and Paxton to have as large a gap between him and Cornyn as possible, because the moment the dust settles on March 3rd and we hit March 4th, you're going to have the Cornyn campaign making a strong case to Donald Trump for why he needs to endorse John Cornyn in the May 26th runoff in order to, say, avoid a Republican loss in Texas and to help Trump maintain his majority in the U.S. Senate. The Paxton campaign will be arguing the exact opposite. But I think I don't think the outcome of that election is too much in doubt in terms of who's going to finish first, who's going to finish second. What is in doubt is the gap, and that gap could prove crucial, along with who wins on the Democratic side, because I think at least Trump supporters believe that the president would be more persuaded by Tallarico as the Democratic candidate as a reason to endorse Cornyn than, say, if Jasmine Crockett is the nominee.
Brandon, what's on party politics this week?
Well, there's a crisis happening in Mexico, and I'm not talking about the lack of Topo Chico coming, which has dramatically affected my life. I'm talking about some of the internal churn with respect to cartel violence. We'll break that down and talk about the implications to how Greg Abbott is using DEHS here in Texas. We'll also talk about Nate Newton, former Cowboys great, being pardoned by the president, and the history and kind of trends in celebrity clemency.
Brendan Rottinghouse is co-host of Houston Public Media's Party Politics program. You can hear it Friday night at 7:30 on News 88.7, see it Friday night at 8 on Houston Public Media TV 8, or check it out at your leisure on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. He's also a professor of political science at the University of Houston. Mark Jones is a political science fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Brandon, Mark, thank you both very much.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Craig.